The pastor of the First Presbyterian Church will give us our invocation, after which the Putnam County Sheriff's Office Honor Guard will post the colors, and then Leisha Trunk, cousin of Francis Bellamy, who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, after which Mary Garcia will lead us in the singing of the national anthem, and we'll go to that point.
Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the First Presbyterian Church. We feel it's very fitting that this event is here today. Presbyterians very humbly believe that we were overtly represented in the signing of the Declaration and in the framing of the Constitution itself. So not that we're exactly taking credit for it, but we feel very strongly connected to it. It's a great honor to have in our sanctuary so many historical figures today. We are delighted at our affiliation with the Daughters of the American Revolution, who have put on this event several years now here, and we hope this is becoming something of a tradition because we feel like this is a great place to do it. At 4 o'clock, we will ring the bell, our church bell, which has been in place since 1886, and that feels like a wonderful way to commemorate the awesome nature of this occasion. I would be remiss by not saying what a great connection we also have to the Putnam County Community Band. Which is a great Putnam County asset, and so all together, what a great occasion this is today. Let us give thanks to God. Let's pray. Gracious, loving God, this is an occasion of great humility for us, but also great enthusiasm and great thanksgiving that we gather today to commemorate and give thanks for the signing of the greatest of all political documents, that which has safeguarded our life as a nation, that which has not only protected us but inspired us to service and to citizenship and to hopefulness. So as we gather around this today, remind us that we live our lives in the tracks of those who've gone before us, that we live our lives on the shoulders of those who have built for us, have sacrificed for us, and make us mindful of our responsibilities to be part of the ongoing nature of this great document which has built this great nation. And we give you thanks for the blessings of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Praying in your name now. Amen.
Everyone, please stand. Thank you. At this time, Mayor Correa. Oh, everybody please be seated. Would like to present a proclamation from the City of Palatka about Constitution Week. If Sally Basson would please come up. She is our chapter regent currently.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for the City of Palatka to be a part of this event. And we approved a proclamation for Constitution Week this past Thursday, September 14th, and I'm going to read it. If I read too quickly, bear with me because I tend to do that. City of Palatka Proclamation. Whereas in May of 1787, delegates gathered in the Pennsylvania State House to chart a new course for our emerging nation, meeting in a time of economic hardship and passionate debate, but with the understanding while controversy is a hallmark of democracy, the forces of tension and uncertainty pale in comparison to the strength of our common ideals. And whereas in a document that has endured for more than 2¼ centuries, the framers put forth their vision for a more perfect union and called it the Constitution of the United States of America. And whereas our Constitution was signed on September 17, 1787, and after an extended period of national conversation and with the promise of a Bill of Rights, it became the supreme law of the land. Since that time, America's Constitution has inspired nations to demand control of their own destinies and has called multitudes to seek freedom and prosperity on our shores. And whereas we celebrate the world's longest surviving written charter of government, let us remember that upholding our founding principles requires us to challenge modern injustices while accepting our responsibility as citizens, our obligations to one another and to future generations, allowing us to move forward, knowing that in the face of impossible odds, those who love their country can change it. And whereas Constitution Week, designated by a joint resolution of Congress as September 17th through 23rd of each year, was initiated by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1955 and signed into law in 1956 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, becoming public law number 915 of the United States of America. Now, therefore, I, Roberta M. Correa, Mayor of the City of Palatka, together with the members of the Palatka City Commission, do hereby recognize and proclaim September 17th through September 23rd, 2023 as Constitution Week in the City of Palatka, and we encourage local government officials and leaders of civic, social, and educational organizations to conduct ceremonies and programs that bring together community members to reflect on the importance of active citizenship, recognize the enduring strength of our Constitution, and reaffirm our commitment to the rights and obligations of citizenship in this great nation. Thank you, City of Palatka. Miss Sally, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Correa. Keep forgetting I need these to see. The DAR and Constitution Day, what do they have to do with each other? She's just stated part of that in the proclamation. The United States Constitution is America's most important document. It stands as a testament to the tenacity of Americans throughout history to maintain their liberties, freedoms, and inalienable rights. Constitution Week is celebrated every September 17th through the 23rd to commemorate its history, importance, and bring attention to how it serves us today. As mentioned, the DAR felt strongly enough about its importance that in 1955, they petitioned Congress to designate the week of September 17th through the 23rd annually in observance of Constitution Week. The resolution was later adopted by the Congress and signed into public law by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The aims of Constitution Week celebration are: 1, to emphasize citizens' responsibilities for protecting and defending the Constitution. 2, to inform people that the Constitution is the basis for America's great heritage and the foundation for our way of life. And 3, to encourage the study of historical events which led to the framing of the Constitution in September 1787. In conjunction with Constitution Week, the DAR started Bells Across America, which is an annual celebration of the signing of the Constitution. Participants gather to ring bells, such as church bells. When the Constitution was signed in Philadelphia, church bells rang out all throughout that city, celebrating that it finally had happened and we did have a Constitution. Today we continue that tradition, and we thank you for joining us. Our local chapter is named for William Bartram. William Bartram's father, John, and William and John Jr. were all botanists for the King of England. This was before we were a country, but they were friends of our founding fathers. Sam Carr has wanted to present a fascinating story about the Bartrams and our founding fathers, but he's tested positive for COVID. And so I've asked Cherie Register to tell a little bit about the painting and the story that tells about William and John's relationship with us in the Constitution. There's supposed to be a picture.
Oh, there's his Pledge of Allegiance, okay.
And the next picture. The next one.
There we go, okay. Good afternoon. This painting memorializes the gathering of three special men at Bartram's Garden, June 10th, 1787. John Bartram, William's father, had built the Greystone house on the banks of the Skull Hill River in Kingslington. Remember, the gardens are just across the street from Philadelphia and Independence Hall. The Bartrams were very familiar with our founding fathers. In fact, we know that 6 of the 7 founding fathers had visited Bartram's Gardens: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington. Benjamin Franklin was John's best friend. They founded the Philadelphia Philosophical Society together, mouthful. Thomas Jefferson was a frequent visitor and purchased many shrubs and trees from the Bartrams. George Washington declined William Bartram's request to dedicate his book, Travels to Washington. Washington didn't think it was appropriate for the president to be recognized. Many of the trees at Mount Vernon were purchased from Bartram's Gardens. Although William is not in our painting, probably because of his shyness, he was definitely there. And that's where the story begins. The Continental Congress began May 25th, 1787, and by Friday, July 13th, the debating on the structure of the new union was stalled and the convention was on the verge of collapse. 5 more yeas were needed to adopt the 3-branch representative government we now have. After adjoining, Metaxas Culler and James Madison gathered at the local tavern, the Indian Queen, for after-dinner conversation. When other delegates overheard Cutter and Madison were planning an excursion to Bartram's Garden in the morning, they wanted to go too. At 5 a.m., just before daybreak, on Saturday morning, July 14th, a group gathered at the Indian Queen Tavern, boarded carriages, and crossed the floating bridge over the river, arriving at Bartram's Garden just at daybreak. Included in this group were James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and 10 other delegates from Massachusetts, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Ben Franklin would have been there, but his kidney stones kept him at home. They arrived at first light and found a barefoot William Bartram hoeing the flower beds. He just stared at us, said Cutler. William spent 3 hours answering botanical questions about the garden, which by design included shrubs and trees representing each of the 13 states. So 2 days later, on Monday, July 16th, the convention convened, and the voting continued. At the end of the day, the votes were changed by delegates from Virginia, North Carolina, and Massachusetts, thereby turning the 13 states into one nation. It can only be speculated that a 3-hour walk on a cool summer morning among the United States of America's most glorious shrubs and trees influenced these men. But what we do know is that the three who changed sides and made the great compromise possible that day all have been there and marveled at what they saw. They changed their vote because the union was worth it. The William Bartram chapter of the DAR can be proud of our namesake. Amen.
Thank you, Cherie, and thank you, Sam, for preparing that. He gets so excited talking about this, so hopefully we did him proud. Last year, if you were here, Mac Ellis was here in person to present Old Glory, and he wrote it down in his calendar for this year to be sure to be here. But even though he's retired, he said, when the Admiral summons you, you go. And he is in Washington, D.C., but he sent this video for us to watch.
Institutions of learning. I stand guard with the greatest military power in the world. Look up and see me. I stand for peace, truth, honor, and justice. I stand for freedom. I am confident. I am arrogant. I am proud. When I am flown with my fellow banners, my head is a little higher, my colors a little truer. I bow to no one. I am recognized all over the world. I am worshipped, I am saluted. I am respected, I'm revered. I am loved, and I am feared. I have fought in every battle of every war for more than 200 years. Gettysburg, Shiloh, Appomattox, San Juan Hill, the trenches of France, the Argonne Forest, Antietam, Rome, the beaches of Normandy, the jungles of Guam, Okinawa, Tara, Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, and a score of other places long forgotten by all, except by those who were there with me. I was there. I led my sailors and Marines. I followed them. I watched over them. They loved me. I was on a small hill in Iwo Jima. I was battle-worn and tired, but my sailors and Marines cheered me. I was proud. I was at Ground Zero in New York City on September 11th as cowardly fanatics attacked America. I was raised from the ashes of once proud buildings by brave firefighters, heroes who risked their lives to save others, showing all that America, although bloody, will never be beaten. Those who will destroy me cannot win, For I am the symbol of freedom, of one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have been soiled, burned, torn, and trampled on the streets of my own country. And when it is done by those whom I have served with in battle, it hurts. But I shall overcome, for I am strong. I have slipped the surely bonds of earth, and from my vantage point on the moon, I stand watch over the uncharted new frontiers of space. I have been a silent witness of all of America's finest hours. But my finest hour comes when I am torn into strips and used as bandages for my wounded comrades on the field of battle. When I fly half-mast to honor my soldiers, my sailors, my airmen, and my Marines. And when I lie in the trembling arms of a grieving mother at the gravesite of her fallen son or daughter, I am proud. My name is Old Glory. Long may I wave, dear God, my God, long may I wave.
I've watched that, I can't tell you how many times, and it always chokes me up. We have our very own George Washington, Johnny Co counts, and he's going to share a few thoughts with us and then lead us in the preamble. You should have been given a little card that says the preamble on it. If not, raise your hand and one of the DAR ladies will get it to you. I don't know if you need that.
Thank y'all for being here. By 1785, I was concerned, excuse me, I need to take time to put on my invention that my good friend Ben had made for me, as my eyes have drawn weary from service to my country. By 1785, I was concerned that the bold experiment that I risked my life for would not succeed for want of lack of unity. I wrote a letter to James Madison on November 30th, and it said, "We are either a united people or we are not. If the former, let us, in all matters of general concern, act as a nation which have national objects to promote and a national character to support. If we are not, let us no longer act a farce by pretending it to." Just 2 years later, my fears were confirmed. It was clear that the Articles of Confederation were not holding our newly formed country together. A group of 55 delegates came together in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with the intention of revising the Articles. While I feared disunion, I hoped the convention would unite the new nation behind the idea of a new federal government. Soon after the convention began, on May 14, 1787, the delegates unanimously elected me to be the convention president. This was one of the few matters they agreed on, as they were a group of passionate Federalists and Anti-Federalists. In presiding over the Constitutional Convention, I worked to forge consensus, demand complete secrecy as delegates set about the controversial task of not just revising the Articles of Confederation, but scrapping them altogether. It was sweltering hot. That spring and summer, these men worked behind closed doors and windows. Tempers often flared and passions ran deep. There was no blueprint for this monumental undertaking, but it ultimately produced one of the world's greatest political documents, the United States Constitution. The new Constitution has, as the public prince will have informed you, been handed to the people of this state by a unanimous vote of the Assembly. But it is not to be inferred from hence that its opponents are silenced. On the contrary, there are many and some powerful ones. Be this as it may, their assiduity stands unrivaled, whilst the friends to the Constitution content themselves with barely avowing their approbation of it. Thus stands the matter with us at present, yet my opinion is that the major voice is favorable. Join me now as we recite the preamble of this divinely inspired document established by the hands of wise men raised up by the Lord for this very purpose. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The foundation of our empire was not laid in the gloomy age of ignorance and superstition, but at an epoch when the rights of mankind were better understood and more clearly defined than at any former period. The researches of the human mind after social happiness have been carried to a great extent. The treasures of knowledge acquired by the labors of philosophers, sages, and legislators through the long succession of years are laid open for our use, and their collected wisdom may be happily applied in the establishment of our forms of government, the free cultivation of letters, the unbounded extension of commerce, the progressive refinement of manners, the growing liberality of sentiment, and above all, the pure and benign light of revelation, have had a ameliorating influence on mankind and increased the blessings of society. At this auspicious period, the United States came into existence as a nation, and if their citizens should not be completely free and happy, the fault will be entirely their own. I earnestly pray that the omnipotent being who has not deserted the cause of America in the hour of its extremest hazard will never yield so fair a heritage of freedom a prey to anarchy or despotism. May God bless America.
Boy, he's tall. At this time, the community band is going to do a military salute. The salute involves all of the branches of government, branches of military, Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, Coast Guard. If you served in one of these branches of the military, when the theme to that branch comes on, please stand. We would like to honor you. And if you are a spouse, you may stand as well. Thank you to our band and for those that served. I was told that if the weather was not cooperating for their flyover, that they would let us know before 3 o'clock, and they have not texted. So at this time, I'd like to turn the time over to the Honorable Howard O. McGillen. Somewhere, I know all about him, according to his legal assistant. Okay. I can tell you that he graduated from West Point at one point, which caught my attention because I took a Girl Scout troop to a Boy Scout jamboree at West Point. And they put the cadets in charge of waking up the girls each morning, which was not the best idea in the world. We had a bit of a hurricane come through, which was unusual for New York, while we were there, and they had put the girls out in the middle of the field of nowhere, so water was running and through our tents and down and around, and the girls were being really good sports about it, but it definitely was something to be remembered. And I think that we will let Judge McGillen tell us a little bit about himself. I'm so sorry. In addition to graduating from there, he graduated from the University of Florida Law School, and then later the Master's of Law from somewhere in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's right. That's all I remember.
Thank you. I've heard the biography before. It's not very interesting. So, well, good afternoon. I'm truly honored and more than just a little bit humbled to be here today to speak on this important day as we celebrate the 236th anniversary of the signing of our United States Constitution. And I'm honored because I'm speaking in front of a group that traces its heritage back to the very founding of our country, back to the original patriots who fought in the War of Independence. And my sister, who's a retired college professor, started a serious study of our family's heritage about 10 years ago, and I pulled up the records that she's compiled on Ancestry and looked to see if we had any patriots in my family. And it turns out, by the rhythm of life, most of my direct lineal ancestors who were here in the colonies in 1776 were only about 6 to 12 years old during the Revolution. So most of them did not serve, but I did find that 2 of my 5th great-grandfathers, Alexander Moore and Isaac Lawrence, both are recorded on the rolls of Continental units. One in a Delaware militia company, so thank you to our militiamen for being here today, and the other in the Pennsylvania Navy. And I will have some other genealogical research to share with you in a few minutes. I'm humbled because I don't think I'm considered by anybody to be a constitutional scholar, although I have studied it. As a soldier and as a lawyer and now as a judge, my life has been guided by that document. And that's what I want to share today, are a little bit of some thoughts on how the Constitution matters and, more importantly, what it requires of all of us. When I was approached and asked to share my thoughts on the Constitution and how it impacts me, I decided I would take a little bit of personal liberty and tell you some ways it's impacted my life and maybe by extension the life of our country. I have sworn, indeed I am sworn, to uphold it and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And my family historically has done that as well. My sister's research reveals that my 4th great-grandfather, David Niven, was a colonel in the Delaware militia, apparently commanding a regiment that included 2 of my 3rd great-grandfathers, Uriah Stroop and Howard Ogle, whose name I bear these days. during the War of 1812. My great-grandfather on my mother's side, you'll love this name, Augustus Caesar Welsh Bennett, lied about his age and enlisted and then was discharged 3 different times during the Civil War. His final enlistment stuck, and he served with General Sherman's army as a drummer boy, and his unit fought at Bentonville, North Carolina, which is recorded as the last full-scale battle of the Civil War. And when I was assigned at what's now called Fort Liberty, then Fort Bragg, our unit visited that battlefield, and I found a plaque commemorating his unit's presence there, which was a great connection with my past. My own father, who I refer to as the original Colonel McGillen, signed up to be a reserve Army officer in 1937, and he started his 1 year of active duty in January 1941. Well, he ended up serving in the European theater during World War II and was on the planning staff of this little soiree called Operation Overlord, D-Day. And within a week or two after that invasion, he was on the beachhead adjusting all of those plans. He ended up retiring as a full colonel in October 1967, so his year ran a little bit overtime. I first took the oath to uphold and defend the Constitution on July 6th, 1977, along with 1,476 of my classmates at West Point. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and bear true allegiance to the national government, and that I will at all times obey the legal orders of my superior officers and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I had just sworn to uphold the Constitution, and truth be told, I hadn't even read it. First read the Constitution during my junior year at West Point in our mandatory law class. They made us read it, and I'm glad they did. And then I took the officer's oath on May 27th, 1981, when I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. That oath is different from the enlisted oath, which we took as cadets. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter, so help me God. Notice the difference between the two oaths. An officer's singular duty is to support and defend the Constitution. There is no mention of superior officers, only the Constitution. And then on December 30th, 2014, I took another oath, this one to support the constitutions of the United States and the state of Florida as a circuit judge. Have you all read the Constitution? Raise your hand if you've read the document. That's actually pretty good. Now, I'll tell you about that in a minute. It is 4,543 words, just a little bit shorter than most magazine articles. In my last 2 years on active duty, I was privileged to be the legal advisor to the Inspector General of the Army. The Inspector General, that's a position with heritage. It goes right back to Baron von Steuben, the first effective Inspector General. But I was his legal advisor, and I had to help train new Inspectors General at our training school. And I asked them, how many of you have read the Constitution? These are colonels and sergeants major. Most of the time, it was less than 10% had actually read it. And so I gave them their first bit of legal advice. Next time you swear to support something with your life, read it. So that's my first point for you today. If you haven't read the document, go back and read it. I'd charge you to go home. Like I said, 4,543 words. According to my Microsoft Word computer, it's 26,211 characters, including the spaces. Or, if you like your material in short bites, 94 tweets. So what did I find when I first read this document? Well, I learned that the founders were very efficient with words. When you read this wonderful document, you'll see the entire structure of our government laid out in its simplicity. Article 1, Congress. Article 2, President. Article 3, the judiciary. Article 4, some important housekeeping, like full faith and credit between the states. Can't go to one state and get out of something in another state. Article 5, how to amend the Constitution. Article 6, ratification of the debts of the revolutionary government and of the Articles of Confederation government, and the all-important Federal Supremacy Clause. And Article 7, how to ratify the document. That's it. 4,543 words. Now, as we know, it's been amended. More about that in just a few minutes. But where did this document come from? And that's a great debate among historians. You've heard a little bit about this today. We've all seen the famous portraits of the convention, especially the ones in the rotunda of the Capitol up in D.C. You see all the founders standing around a table, looking very dignified and noble. But we know that the serious scholarship tells us that the Constitutional Convention was not a love fest. Moreover, they didn't really even trust each other. The rural states were pitched against the more mercantile states. The small states didn't trust the big states. The South didn't trust the North. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? I think we have a word for it. It's called normal. Yet we ended up with this pretty good document, and it was a result of what historians have called the Grand Compromise. Now, let's be realistic. It was not perfect. It included tolerance for slavery. And more than a few of the ideas needed some amending pretty quickly. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Richard Nixon had to serve as John F. Kennedy's vice president? I'm not sure that would have worked out real well, but that's the way the Constitution was originally written. The person that got the second number of electoral votes was the vice president, and the president had the most. So that's the way it would have worked out in 1960. That was a good fix. But putting aside those problems, we ended up with a Constitution which has endured and served us very well. It was a result of honest debate about real issues among serious people. It's a document spawned by the experience of the Revolution, and it's a product of revolutionary ideas that started brewing in about 1774 and 75. I'd like to think of our Constitution as the book set that comes between two important bookends in our national heritage. On the one side is the Declaration of Independence. On the other side, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution in the middle. On the one side, you have the Declaration. It's our famous Dear George letter. Dear George, we're breaking up. You closed our courts. You shut down our legislatures. You made us sleep with your soldiers. You hauled us off to England for trial. You shut down our press, and you stopped our lawful assemblies. You taxed us without our consent. So for me, history is in my blood. How many of you have been to Philadelphia? Okay, I grew up there. We used to visit Independence Hall all the time. Whenever somebody came in out of town, we'd head downtown to Independence Hall and see the Liberty Bell. When I was a kid, you could walk up to the Liberty Bell and stick your finger in the crack. Close contact with history. You could walk into the first Congress Hall and look up at the chair where the President of the Continental Congress sat, where they signed the Declaration of Independence and later the Constitution. You could breathe in the history. Mostly smelled like tired old wood, but you could breathe it in, okay? So from 1775 to 1783, we fought the War of Independence. And to the surprise of just about everyone in the world, at the end of 8 years, including, I'd like to believe, surprise to King George, we didn't go running back to the king. If you've seen Hamilton, the musical, you'll understand the reference. We fought and mostly lost a lot of battles. But what we never did was quit. And in the end, the Redcoats marched out of Yorktown. Still gets to me. They grounded their muskets and their swords and their colors at the feet of the Continental Army. Have you been to Yorktown? How many folks have been there? You should go there. I was privileged to serve there near late in my Army career. To me, Yorktown holds a special significance because that's where the ideas of the Declaration became solidified. That's where the victory was won. Now, they aren't really sure exactly where the surrender took place, but there is a field that's marked out as Surrender Field, and there's a small plaque there that commemorates that. It's just an empty field. There's nothing there but that marker, and that's where General Cornwallis's army came out to surrender. Now, Cornwallis was sick that day, probably sick of losing. So he sent out a subordinate commander. That general tried to give his sword to General Rochambeau. General Rochambeau was the commander of the French forces. Rochambeau said, nope, pointed over to General Washington. General Washington then pointed over to his subordinate, General Benjamin Lincoln, and said, if Cornwallis ain't showing up, I'm not taking this dude's sword. maybe take a little license with the language there, but nevertheless, the world was turned upside down. It's actually the music the British had to play as they marched out. The world turned upside down. The war was over, but we know the work wasn't done. The Articles of Confederation, as General Washington reminded it, just plain didn't work. They assumed all the states would treat each other fairly. They'd all volunteer to fund national defense, that commerce would flow freely without any restriction between the states. Well, they didn't. And so the Constitutional Convention met and conducted a second revolution behind closed doors. You may know, no one actually sent the delegates to Philadelphia to come up with a new system of government. That's what they did. In fact, this one young upstart named James Madison actually showed up at the start of the whole conference with a rough draft already done. The audacity of that young man. In the end, not even all the delegates would sign the final version. And ratification was most definitely not guaranteed. But on September 17, 1787, they did sign it. And on June 21, 1788, when New Hampshire ratified it, it became the 9th state ratifying it, went into effect. But we all know even then the work wasn't done. Remember all those clauses in the Dear George letter? Closing our courts, shutting down the press, free trials, no sleeping with soldiers. Well, we forgot to deal with those, so we quickly had to come up with the Bill of Rights. Now, the Constitution has only been amended 27 times. That's only actually 17 times since the Bill of Rights. And, truth be told, the 27th Amendment was actually proposed along with the original Bill of Rights, but was only ratified in 1992. So that's 202 years, 7 months, and 10 days after it was proposed. Who says Congress is slow now? Now, I've been asked at times, what's my favorite amendment? As you know, we judges have to run for re-election every 6 years, but we're not allowed to take political positions for some very, very good reasons. So people try to get around that by asking me questions like, do you like the Second Amendment? And I tell them, yeah, I do. But you know what? I also like the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Seventh. You know what? I like them all, except for 18. That was so bad we had to get rid of that. That was prohibition, by the way. It's a beautiful document, but it's also a vexing document. James McHenry, and this goes reference to the Benjamin Franklin comment, who I think Fort McHenry is named after, was a Maryland delegate to the Constitutional Convention, and he's the source of the famous quotation. It seems a certain Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia stopped Ben Franklin, who was then 81 years old, and asked him, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? A republic, replied the doctor, if you can keep it. It set up a new form of government. It borrowed elements from antiquity, from the democracy of Athens to the Republic of Rome. Under its umbrella, we have built the strongest and richest country in the history of this world. But it's also a messy document. 3 branches means all 3 have to have their feet on the ground. All 3 must do their job. All 3 have to weigh in on matters of importance. Moreover, it requires serious people who care about the country more than their own personal desires. Harking back to British tradition, it deals with, in fact, Presbyterian tradition, it deals with the commonwealth, not just factions. It requires citizens to inform themselves about what their government is up to. It requires judges to follow the law, not the politics of the day or of the mob, even if it's their mob. It requires us to listen and sometimes make to the incredibly outrageous ideas of our neighbor. It makes it harder sometimes to solve a crime. It can be noisy and rambunctious. It doesn't even purport to answer every question. Rather, it requires serious persons of goodwill to listen to each other and make the best decision for the country. And I wouldn't have it any other way, and I don't think you would either. And I'm pretty sure the Founding Fathers wouldn't want it that way either, because they knew their history. You see, the founders were first and foremost loyal British subjects, right up until July 4th, 1776. Their history was a history of limited government. The earliest kings of England were actually elected. You may not know that. They were not chosen by heredity. The Witan would come and vote on a new king. That's how Alfred the Great became king. Later, inheritance became the norm, and you may recall that heritage that I talked about. Well, a little bit more of it here. You see, my 24th great-grandmother on my father's side, my sister really has done her research. Her name was Eleanor. You know her as the Duchess of Aquitaine, Queen of France, and later Queen of England. Her husband, my 24th great-grandfather, was King Henry II, also known as Henry Curtmantle, famous as the founder of the common law. Also infamous for the death of Thomas à Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, and sadly also the father of my 23rd great-grandfather, King John. Great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. He was a king so bad nobody has ever taken his name again. Now, at least he signed the Magna Carta and then repudiated it, leading to one of England's many small civil wars. Now, there were strong English kings and there were weak kings, there were good kings and there were bad kings, and they all had to deal with that pesky Parliament if they wanted cash. Until Charles I, he got so fed up with Parliament that he shut it down, proroguing it, they call, proroguing, whichever way you want to pronounce the British term, for 11 years. And when they came back, they were armed with a new idea, and one particularly radical one, that the king was only the representative of the true sovereignty which belonged to the people. Now, you may have been taught that this was one of John Locke's ideas. Well, kind of like the Marine Corps, he just had better press. This is an idea that comes out of the time leading up to the English Civil War, to the toppling of Charles I and his replacement by Cromwell. And I would note this was also the height of English Calvinism, with a nod to the Presbyterian church in which we're gathered in. But the British, for they were British by then, not just English, felt they needed a king, and so they brought back Charles II, succeeded by his brother James II, who was also a bit of a disaster. So they invited the German branch of the royal family to come over, first William and Mary, then Anne, and then Georges I, II, and III. So we know where the story goes from here. But here's an animating thought. You have to remember that neither the Declaration nor the Bill of Rights were really new ideas. The revolutionaries were fighting to restore what they thought they had already won in the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution. They were fighting not for some radical new idea. Yes, ma'am?
It's 4 o'clock.
Is it? Goodness. Yes, it is. All right.
Can we come back?
We can. Go ahead. You want to?
If everybody will file out, if you don't have a bell, get one on the way out. Watch for the flyover. They'll be coming over the river, and then come right back in here for the rest of the judge's message.
I had my timer going. I would have stopped
Oh,
right
no
now.
worries. I'm so sorry.